third generation military.
What would that be?
But I definitely never became a prisoner of war.
Thank God for that.
So my job was looking after 6 battalions of 2 brigades. When it became very dark, and I noticed that there were bears around, and I was not carrying my weapon at that time, So the army is an institution that always recognizes competence, and they reward competence almost immediately. So you realize that whatever skills you have, they have to be honed to a razor sharp edge and kept on that edge all the time.
All the time. Thank you so very much for giving me your time and willingness to share your stories. I'm so excited to listen to them. So I'd like to start off by asking you, what influenced you to get into the military?
Oh, well, third generation military. So I think my granduncle, he's the one who, his stories from the Second World War is really something that inspired me as a child. And then, of course, my own dad, who retired after nearly 40 years in service way back in 1984. And I joined the academy in 1976. So there was a short period of overlap before he retired. The stories that I heard in my childhood was about the exploits of my granduncle and how he was captured by the Japanese either in the fall of Malaya or in the fall of Singapore. And then spent time in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And then how he escaped with a bunch of his colleagues, made his way across Malaya, caught a boat, fishing vessel or something like that, went across to Indonesia, and finally made it back home after 3 years when everybody at home thought he was dead.
Wow,
He just walked in one day. So
that's amazing.
So that is.
So you must be having a lot of stories growing up as kid, right? To see your
absolutely.
grandfather
That's
having
right.
such an experience. Yeah.
That's right. And my father was an orphan. I mean, he lost his mother, I think, at the age of 7, and his father at the age of 14. But they grew up in joint families, so he had some level of support. So he knew, by the age of 17, he knew that he had to go get work, and he left home with $5 in his pocket. So he managed to get a tentative recruitment in Cochin, and then they sent him to the main selection center in Coimbatore. And once he got selected, they put him on a military special from Madras to Lucknow. And imagine this is a boy, he had given his age as over 18, so as to be eligible. He was actually only 17. And then he made his way across the country and joined the Army Medical Corps as a boy in their boys' battalion, And then finally he became a soldier. And then after a couple of years in the army, one of his officers who interacted with him, he's saying, "You speak very good English. He says, why don't you apply for the officer corps?" That's how he was picked up. At that time, it was only a question of an interview, and
Right.
he was sent off to the Indian Military Academy. So that's how he came into the army. So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
I can see the pride in the way you explain this. They must have obviously made such a huge impact on your life, right?
Very huge impact. I mean, starting from almost nothing and then making it to a very senior rank in the army before he retired. My granduncle, his story is really inspirational. I mean, this I didn't realize it when I heard it in my childhood. But when these movies began to come out about Second World War, when I saw The Bridge on the River Kwai for the first time, and then I began to relate what it must have, because he kept it very short. He says, "Yeah, I was 3 years. I was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and then I escaped, and then I made my way back home." That's about it. so that is not. I mean, what he told us was not really much of a story. Probably he wanted to keep the horrors of war from all the women folk in the family back home. In 1969, my dad moved to Jammu. from Delhi. He was in what is called NIFA in those days, which is the Northeast Frontier Agency, what is today the Seven Sisters of the East,
Right.
Assam, Arunachal,
Correct.
Nagaland,
Yeah. Yeah.
Manipur, Mizoram, and all that. No, in those days it used to be called just NIFA.
Mm.
NIFA used to be a non-family station. So when he got posted there, he had sent us all back home, and it was in '69 and '71 we had the war, yeah, and I had a
Right.
ringside view of the war as an 11-year-old. So of course, as children, we don't really understand the seriousness of war. For us, it was like a big game.
Mm.
Fireworks every day and aircraft flying around and stuff like that. But it was quite an experience in the sense that as when we grow up in the army, we tend to get very highly integrated into the unit life. We are part of all the functions in the unit. And when the unit moves to, the for field firing or the firing ranges, even some of us tag along, who are interested, and we go, shoot a few rounds and stuff like that. So even by the age of 10, 11, I knew how to handle most of the weapons in the unit. And
Wow.
when this war started, I remember we were in a house. It's a residential complex, and in the backyard. I remember there was a guard from the unit who was deputed
Mm.
for our protection, because there was a lot of threat of infiltrators, of parachutists and stuff like that.
This is in
So
Jammu, you're saying?
this is in Jammu, yeah.
Oh.
So my dad's unit had left a guard behind, and I was standing there in the backyard talking to him when this air raid came in. Very low, very fast. The first aircraft passed, and we had bunkers in the house, and trenches and all that. So any air raid means you had to just run and dive into a bunker. And just imagine, I'm talking about as an 11-year-old kid. Yeah.
7 years. I
So,
can't.
so
I can't imagine. None of us can imagine actually. It's all
exactly,
only, it's all like what we see in the movies, right?
exactly, yeah,
Army related movies, yeah.
exactly. So he turned and ran to the trench, where he had kept his weapon. And he must have suddenly remembered that he had left me behind. So he turned to look at me or call me or something like that. When he tripped over a root, and he fell straight into the trench, head first, and he got knocked out. And then I remember climbing into the trench after him, picking up the gun, putting it on the at the edge of the trench, and trying to shoot the aircraft as a
Wow.
11-year-old. But the funny thing is that by the time the war came,
Mm.
the weapons had changed. So earlier we used to have the bolt action .303s, and by the time the war came, they had switched to the 7.62 self-loading rifles, and I didn't know how to operate it. I was looking for the bolt, and I couldn't
Mm.
find a bolt anywhere. And then by the time he had recovered sufficiently enough, said, "Baba, aap hat jao. He said, "Ye main karunga." so then, so these
Right.
are, little incidents, that really inspire you. He says, if I was looking for a career, and I'm so fascinated by all this, so why not a career in the army? So,
I think
so
this the background, the fact that your grandfather and your father were in military actually made you think it that way.
that's
Otherwise, I'm sure it makes a lot of sound and noise when it
why.
passes you. So any other 11-year-old would have been traumatized by this incident. However, you looked at it as an inspiration, which is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So did you always know that you'll get into military?
I mean, for me, there was no other choice.
Why do you say that? That you didn't have a choice?
Uh, I mean, this was a decision that I made when I was very young, and I never thought of anything else. For me, army was home. Although later on I realized that's a silly, childish, idealized kind of perception. Because army is not home. Your parents are in the army and they have a home in an army base. That doesn't make the army a home. Your home is still your home where your parents are. But then, to a child, when you look back over the years,
Mm.
you realize that sometimes I think I was a bit too idealistic as a child. I think because of the kind of environment I grew up in, I couldn't be anything else, I guess.
Awesome. What about your own journey into military?
But I definitely never became a prisoner of war.
Thank God for that. We don't want any prisoners of war.
Although the army
Yeah.
thought that I was a prisoner of war, there was a point when I was in Kashmir, sometime during my career. Uh, the unit used to support a formation that was deployed along the line of control.
Mm.
It is the one division that is there in the valley in those days. So as an engineer, we had to support all the entire formation. So my job was looking after 6 battalions of 2 brigades. So which meant, and they covered nearly about I would say about 100 kilometers of the line of control. And my job was to visit each and every picket along the line to ensure that whatever work needs to be done would be done. So what used to happen? You used to go to a base, a battalion base, and then you meet the officers at the base, usually the commanding officer, and then he gives you a briefing, and then you move up to one of the pickets, where some work is happening. And so this happened. I was there for a couple of years, so every month I should be out for 25, 30 days. And on one of those occasions, I went up to one of the pickets, checked the progress of work, and then moved along the line of control to different pickets. And then finally, I got a call from the unit saying that you need to come back. I broke that outing, and I decided to come back to base. But as soon as I landed back in the unit, the base, they said, no, the local commander has asked you to go back to one particular picket and check on the work there, because some critical work was going on there. I said, look, I have just come back down. Give me a day. I will relax and then I'll go back the next day. He said, no. He's saying, Commander Saab ne bola hai ki aaj hi ऊपर पहुंचना है. So I said, okay, ठीक है. So I set out, and now what happens is that in the hills, of course you're very tough, you're very acclimatized, and you can climb up and down from 7,000, 8,000 feet to 13,000, 14,000 feet every day if required. But when you come down a hill very fast, so you lose about 6,000 feet in 2 hours, then your muscles just give way. and you're all soggy for at least for 24 hours, unless you rest and recover, you're not good to go. So when they sent me back the same day, and I was just absolutely exhausted, I reached about halfway up. The total 8-hour climb. You don't go alone, obviously, but these are the line of control. So there's a patrol called a half link, that carries you to a point, halfway point. And there is a patrol that comes down from the picket, and you marry up with that patrol and then climb. So at the half link, when I reached the half link, I found that the other patrol hadn't come. So, and it was becoming dull. I said, I might as well start climbing on my own. As sappers, we are very confident about the land, lay of the land, But the infantry is not all that confident about us, or about themselves, or about us, I don't know. But so I began to climb. And at some point when it became very dark, and I noticed that there were bears around, and I was not carrying my weapon at that time, So I had a boy with me, and I said, okay, bhalu dikh raha hai. I said, we better get out of the way and find a place to rest for the night, and kal subah nikal jayenge ufar tak. So I looked around and I found one tiny light on the side to the side, not along the path, but to the side, off to the side. So I climbed up to that, and it turned out to be, these Gujars, Bakarwa. So there were 3 of them, and their herd was scattered across the hillside. And so I said, I wanted a little space to sleep, for the night, and kal subah nikal jayenge. They immediately offered me a share of their dinner. And they make some fantastic stuff. I know they add some sort of powdered millet into tea and have that thick tea. So they offered me that. That's what I had for dinner. So in exchange, I was carrying a torch and a few batteries, and that is something that is very precious for these guys. When they go hunting for their sheep at night. So I gave them that, and then I crashed, And then throughout the night, I could hear somebody calling out to me, I said, hell, it must be a dream. And then next morning, these Gujars, they woke me up, they saying, Saab bula rahe hain." I said, Saab? What's up? So when I looked over the edge, down below, about 500 feet below, there was an infantry patrol there. They had come down. These were the guys who come down and picked me up the previous evening, So they were there and they said, Saab, aap theek ho? I said, मैं तो ठीक हूँ भाई, आप कैसे हो? So he said, आप ठीक है, अभी उठे नहीं है ना? तो आप सो जाओ, आप जब भी उठ जाओगे पहुंच जाना. So then they turned and walked back up to the post. Yeah, it was just another 3 to 4 hours climb. And only then I realized, once I reached the post, he said, company commander there, he said, I'm damn sorry, I had to send a report that, you haven't reached last night. And there was total panic in the whole of the Northern Army. I mean, the report went up from the company level to the battalion, from the battalion to the div, from the div to the corps, from corps to the army, and the army command had informed the army headquarters, and then the order came that send out patrols, make sure he doesn't cross the line of control into Pakistan by accident. There's no way I can cross, but then they were
But
not.
you never know.
Yeah. So it's like it's a ridge, So the ridge, has a little dip. It's called a col, and we climb up to the col, and then we have to turn right and move along the ridge. If you cross it, then you cross the line of control. So they thought I had just crossed over and gone down. And while I was fast asleep and enjoying myself, these guys were out patrolling the whole night looking for me. It's just, when you look back on it over the years, it's like a lot of fun. Yeah, but I got hell for it, from my own CEO.
I'm sure you gave them a scare. Already, is there any incident or an event in your entire life in the military that has impacted you in a big way, which you carry forward even today?
The army is an institution that always recognizes competence, and they reward competence almost immediately. Whether you participated in an operation or even if you're not gone into active combat, the fact that it is an operation is sufficient for them to recognize the fact that you were a part of the operation, and they will reward you for that, And I got a call one day. I was in Kashmir, and I got a call one day saying that you've been selected for the Black Cats. I didn't even know this organization at that time. This is Black Cat. What is that? And I had applied for the Para Special Forces just before that. I said, "Are they talking about Para Special Forces? Has my call for probation come?" He said, "No. This is a separate unit under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and what my unit told me, or that was the impression at that time, that they provide security to VIPs." So I said, that's a very strange job for an army officer to be doing, I said,
I thought it was like a commando or something.
It is. But the unit, the perception of the unit is that, you provide security cover to VIPs. And that is one of the, it is not on the charter of NSG. NSG is what is called a Federal Counter-Terrorist Special Forces Unit. And their job is a federal force to be used only against specific contingencies in a counter-terror situation. Like, for example, if you have a hostage situation and the hostage needs to be rescued, or if you have a hijack situation and that airliner, that hijack needs to be halted, stuff like that. Right. But within the NSG, there are also police units. And the entire NSG was conceived, if you remember Blue Star, 1984. Right. Blue Star was entrusted to the army, although it was supposed to be a police operation, right, but the police were not equipped for it. So they sent in the army, and the outcome of Blue Star. Yes. So then they raised this unit, and they patterned it on the US Delta Force and the German GSG-9. So these are all specialized units, British SAS. These are all specialized military special forces units. But what they did is that, they decided, okay, they need to have strike elements and cordon elements. Strike elements are commandos. They were drawn from the army. And the cordon elements, which had to interface with the local police, they decided to co-opt from the Central Armed Constabulary, like the BSF, the ITBP, SSP, and those kind of units. So NSG is a mixed bag. And because the police units didn't have much of a job in the NSG supporting the strike elements, they said, okay, isko kaise istemal karna hai? Chalo VIP duty mein laga do. So it is the police guys within NSG who is to provide security duties for VIPs. But the impression in the country is that NSG as a whole provides security duties they do security duties for VIPs who are under that Z category.
Z plus.
Yeah. So if you've seen the the operations in the Bombay terror attack,
right?
Initially, of course, the army provided a little bit of support, but they're not trained for this kind of operation. Then they called in the naval marine commandos, and they mentioned even they are not really equipped for this kind of operation. It's this is actually a police commando action, but in India we don't have police commandos as yet. Now some of the units have been trained by the NSG, and now they have raised their own police commando. Like Punjab Police has a police commando unit, Haryana Police has a police commando unit. But at that time, there was no police commandos. So they keep roping in the army anytime they had some. But an army never trains for such eventualities. Navy, imagine marine commandos, they are designed for, operations on the high seas here. Or, approaching enemy territory, from the sea or land, air. They got different modes of insertion, and we used to getting pulled into these police operations. So that's how finally.
I guess you did, or rather, the armed forces get pulled even natural calamity operations. I've seen
exactly.
Army guys called in, whether it's Kedarnath or Chennai floods, you have them everywhere. Poor things are really helping us. So coming back to the question, what kind of impact did that have on your life?
That is the first time the army, although we were deployed on the line of control, and that means it's an operationally active role.
Right.
I found that the engagement that you have, the deep engagement that you have at a very personal level, while in the NSG, was of a completely different order than anything in the army. Because here, you can be shopping for vegetables with your wife, say at 11 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 o'clock in the evening, you are in an active gunfight in a different part of the country. So right. You get picked up from Delhi, you get thrown into places like Kashmir and all that, and then immediately you're launched. So you realize that, whatever skills you have, they have to be honed to a razor sharp edge and kept on that edge all the time.
All the time.
So for 3 years, we were right on our, toes there. I mean, not a moment to spare. I remember getting mobilized for an operation in Kashmir, and as soon as I come back, I get thrown into Sri Lanka, and we are told that we're going to be part of the army. But when I land there, we get briefed by RNAW, and the operation is completely secret, and it has nothing to do with the military operations. As a matter of fact,
it's during the LTTE time.
So we then began to operate. And this reminds me that even in 1971, when the Bangladesh operations active operations hadn't started, the military was heavily involved. And at that time, we were working with what is called Bengali irregular armies called the Mukti Bahini. Like that, LTT was on our side first, and then they turned court, and they came back against us. But then there were other groups within the Tamil Ilan, who were against the LTT. Sometimes you wonder, at our level, we are at the grassroots level, and a lot of the time we don't get the big picture. And a lot of the time, if we don't understand what our mission is, it leaves us very confused. Any military operation, they say that you have to have a political objective. Yeah, and from the political objective, you derive your military objective. Now, military
Wow.
objectives, sometimes, at a high level, military objectives may be clear to somebody up there. But at the grassroots level, we have no clue what that is. Because we are often, that military objective, the end objective is not revealed to us. We just know that we are operating with people whom we are not sure we can trust, because we're operating with them for the first time. For all you know, they may turn around and point the gun at us. So it's very tricky situations, and what happens is that, a lot of these people, we used to lose about 10-15% of the strength of these people to the LTT almost on a monthly basis. Yeah.
You mean loss of lives?
Yeah, they used to just cross over. They are in one camp today.
Oh.
And the army is operating against the LTT. We are operating with the non-LTT groups, trying to bolster their military strength.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, you find that these very people with whom you're operating, they have gone across and joined the LTT. Now the LTT is fighting the Indian Army, and you're caught somewhere in between. That is when, that is when I first began to question the rationale of the question that came to my mind first is that who's really in charge?
Correct.
I mean, in that particular scenario where we operating under RNAW, where we operating under the military, where we operating under some sort of diffuse, Tamil group, net, or where we somehow, supporting the Sri Lankan government, and as a result, we had links to them. Who was really in charge of this operation? And we were moving into areas where the army was moving out. So with the army moving out, the objective was to have these groups then take over and dominate those areas to prevent the LTT coming back. They were the most popular group. And for them, they were fighting for a homeland, a Tamil homeland, which means they had the support of the Tamil people. And if you have the support of the Tamil people, then what the hell are we doing? So sometimes, some of the decisions get taken in Delhi and you're thrown into the field. And you may end up, and that was my biggest fear, while in this operation, that you may end up fighting the Indian Army.
You don't know that.
Yeah, you don't know that because, we are operating undercover. And we can't 100% trust the loyalty of the people, the Tamils that we are working with. Which group are they working for at the moment?
See, so it reminds me of working in the ambiguous situations. Like you have no clue what is a bigger picture that you're working for. However, you have certain tasks that you need to do, right? And this is what I need to do, and hence I'm here. So how did you manage yourself in that situation? Because ambiguity is kind of energy draining, right? It's sort of when you don't know your path, you don't know the purpose why you're there, and yet you need to work because not everything is shared, right? You're obviously undercover, and so how do you manage yourself in that situation?
We luckily, at that time I was just a captain, and we had a commanding officer who was a colonel. So he probably knew the big picture or a limited big picture, and he used to give us specific tasks. The task could be, okay, here is a new bunch of recruits, Tamils. These are volunteers. We want you to train them and integrate them into a cohesive unit. So something as simple, it boils down to setting up simple tasks to take an absolutely raw recruit, so to say, and train him in the basics of weapons and tactics so that he can become an effective member of the group. So our main focus was on ensuring that there's a steady stream of new volunteers coming and joining these groups so as to bolster their strength, so that they reach a critical mass where they can then take over from the army that was vacating and withdrawing. As a matter of fact, they had already begun the process of withdrawing from Sri Lanka at the time. So at our level, if you think only of the day-to-day objectives, it's very straightforward. But it's only when you begin to think more than you should be thinking. That's why sometimes in the army they say, don't think too much.
They say that in the civil life also all the time, like don't overthink.